Interregnum, a character study of Vegeta in the years between planet Vegeta and Earth. 8. He is not on the planet when it ends. This is the detail no one thinks to mention to him directly, because no one considers it worth mentioning. He is already a fixture of Frieza's outer garrison by then, already catalogued, already fitted for armor 2 sizes, too large in the shoulders, so that it hangs off him like a shed skin waiting to be grown into. He learns that his home no longer exists the way he learns most things in that first year, secondhand, in the margins of someone else's conversation, delivered, without ceremony, because ceremony would imply the event deserved one. A technician mentions it to another technician, while recalibrating a scouter. Routine matter, mineral rights reassigned, coordinates struck from a registry. Vegeta is close enough to hear the name of his own world used as a unit of paperwork. He does not ask for confirmation. Asking would mean there was a question, and a question would mean there was still some version of the answer he could survive not hearing. So he says nothing. And he goes on standing where he had been standing, and later that means his composure becomes a kind of legend among the crew. The little prince, who didn't flinch, when the truth is simpler and worse. He had already flinched, days earlier, at something smaller, and had used up the only flinch he was going to allow himself. He finds, before the day is out, a terminal in an unattended corridor, and the clearance codes to make it show him what he already suspects it will. The logs are dispassionate. A sensor buoy's readout, a spike of light registered at a distance that renders it a single clean pixel, a timestamp, a return to baseline. This is the entirety of the record. No witness is interviewed, because there is no one left to interview. No accounting of who was standing where, just a graph, and a number, and the small mechanical fact of a needle moving, and then not moving. He watches at once, memorizes the shape of the spike the way he will later memorize the shape of an opponent's stance, and does not call the file back up again. He understands, watching it, that this is the closest thing to a funeral he is going to be given, a chart on a screen, read alone, by lamplight, that isn't even his own world's light, and he decides, in the specific way an 8-year-old decides things that will govern him for decades, that he will not ask for a better one. Nappa finds him some hours after, doesn't ask what he's heard, just stands nearby, arms crossed, radiating the particular uselessness of a big man with nothing to hit. Vegeta has already worked out, at 8, that Nappa's presence is itself a kind of information. Nappa does not stand near things that don't matter, and he resents being legible to anyone, even an ally, even a Saiyan, even a man who used to let him ride on his shoulders when the word purge still meant something abstract. You'll want to eat something, Nappa says. It is the closest anyone comes in that first year to acknowledging what has happened, and Vegeta understands even then that this is deliberate, that grief in Frieza's service is a liability with a price tag, that the boy who is seen mourning is the boy who gets reclassified from asset to risk. He eats. He does not taste it. He is taken, not long after, to observe his first purge, not to perform one. He is too small, but to observe, because Frieza believes in early education. The planet is unremarkable. The people are unremarkable. He stands at the rear of the landing party in armor that swallows his wrists, and watches Dodoria work through a coastal settlement with the bored efficiency of a man doing inventory, and Vegeta notices, distantly, that he is doing the thing he will spend the next 18 years doing, counting bodies, counting seconds, counting the mechanical details of violence instead of the violence itself, because the details can be held at a manageable distance, and the whole cannot. There are other children among the garrison. Low elite sons brought up the same pipeline he was, and in the weeks after, he notices the ones who cried where they could be seen get quietly reassigned to duties that keep them out of Frieza's direct notice, a mercy that is not a mercy, a demotion dressed as consideration, a permanent note in a file that reads unreliable. He notices too that this is never explained to any of them, it is simply observed, and survived or not. He decides which kind of child he intends to be within the same week he stops being able to remember his mother's voice with any confidence, and he understands, even then, that he has traded one loss to guarantee against another. That night he sleeps with his back against the bulkhead, tail wound tight around his own waist instead of loose the way it used to lie, scouter volume at 0, listening to nothing on purpose. It is the first time he arranges his body for defense while sleeping among his own allies. It will not be the last. 12. By 12 he has a kill count that outpaces boys 3 years older, and a face that has already learned to hold still under scrutiny, which is its own kind of achievement, because Frieza's court runs on the currency of visible reaction, and Vegeta has decided, with the total conviction of a child who has found the one lever he can control, that he will not pay in that currency ever again. The mission is a minor one, A backwater agricultural world, populated by something soft-skinned and long-limbed that farms a mineral. Frieza's empire has decided it wants Vegeta is sent alone this time, a test, though no one calls it that, with Nappa monitoring from orbit in case the alone proves to be a miscalculation. It is not a miscalculation. It takes him 40 minutes. Near the end, an adult of the species gets between him and a cluster of what are unmistakably its young, and does the thing that every parent species does in the last minute of its existence, which is offer everything it has in exchange for the one thing that matters. It doesn't speak Vegeta's dialect. He understands the shape of the plea anyway. Every language collapses into the same 3 or 4 sounds at the end. He looks at the young ones for exactly as long as it takes to assess whether they represent a resource or a threat. They are neither. This assessment takes him under 2 seconds, and he is aware, with the cold sideways awareness of a boy watching himself from slightly outside his own body, that 2 seconds is not very long to decide whether something lives, and that he has just done it as automatically as adjusting a scouter's focus. He does not spare them out of mercy. Mercy is not an available category. He spares them because Frieza's directive specified the adults and the mineral rights and said nothing about juveniles too small to work, and because deviation from a directive, in either direction, generosity included, is its own kind of exposure, and Vegeta has already learned that the safest transaction with Frieza's empire is the exact transaction it asked for, no more, no less. He tells himself this on the way back to the ship, turns it over, polishes it, and it becomes true by the time he says it to Nappa, who doesn't ask. Frieza, reviewing the report, is pleased. Efficient, he says, in that voice he uses that makes efficiency sound like affection, and then, almost as an afterthought, asks whether Vegeta's father ever spoke to him of restraint. It is not a real question. Vegeta has been in this court long enough by 12 to recognize a question that already contains its own correct answer, and to know that the correct answer here is silence. Not because silence is truthful but because any answer at all, grief, pride, denial, would hand Frieza something to hold up to the light later. He says nothing. Frieza smiles as though the silence were itself the desired response, which perhaps it is, and Vegeta stands very straight, while being praised by the man who ended his species, and files the exchange away in the part of himself that is beginning to specialize in filing things away without examining them. He notices, around this age, the particular shape of his own reputation among the other young Saiyans still drawing breath. Raditz, older by a stretch, low elite by blood and aware of it in every gesture, has taken to a kind of deference around him that is not quite respect, closer to the careful distance one keeps from something that might detonate. Vegeta does nothing to correct the impression. A prince with no throne has exactly one asset left that the rest of his dwindling species can still be made to recognize, and he spends the next several years cultivating it the way another child might cultivate a friendship, deliberately, and at cost. He has started keeping, in an inner seam of his armor, a small scratched fragment of alloy stamped with the royal crest, salvaged from something. He no longer lets himself remember what, only that it was his before any of this, and that it is the only object in the universe that still refers to him by a name, that isn't a rank. He does not look at it often, looking at it as a small indulgence, rationed like everything else that isn't strength. Pride, at 12, has stopped being a feeling and started being a technique. He practices it the way Nappa makes him practice forms, the set of the jaw, the angle of the chin, the specific stillness that reads, to anyone watching, as contempt rather than the thing it actually is, which he does not have a word for yet and does not go looking for one. 16. He is dangerous now in a way the court has to account for, which means the court has started testing the leash rather than the boy. Zarbin does it with words, elegantly, the way Zarbin does everything. A comment about the smell of Saiyans, delivered with a smile in front of enough witnesses that a response would be insubordination, and a non-response would be swallowed insult, and either way Zarbin collects something. Vegeta has learned by now that these are not accidents, they are audits. The Empire wants to know, periodically, exactly how much pressure the leash can take before the animal on the end of it forgets what a leash is. He does not forget. His ki spikes, a fraction, involuntary. A flare he kills before it clears his own skin, and he turns the flare into a slow exhale through the nose, and he says nothing, and he leaves the room at a pace that could not be mistaken for retreat, because he has rehearsed the pace specifically. Later, alone, he puts his fist through a bulkhead panel hard enough to break 2 knuckles, and does not have them looked at, because an injury that has to be explained is an injury that exposes the moment that caused it, and the moment is not for anyone else's ledger. He knows why the leash holds. He watched, 2 years prior, What happened to a low elite named Fash's cousin? A name barely worth remembering, which is itself the point, who miscalculated the exact same audit and answered Dodoria with his fists instead of his silence, and does not exist anymore in any tense. Vegeta filed the lesson without needing it demonstrated twice. This is what he has instead of grief now, in actuarial sense, terribly precise, of what insubordination costs, and who is currently solvent enough to survive spending it. He is not solvent. He knows he is not solvent. Being the last verified bloodline of a dead throne makes him valuable and worthless in the same motion, valuable enough that killing him outright would waste an asset, worthless enough that no one above Nappa would call it a waste if it happened. There is a story, older than either of them, that circulates in low murmurs among the surviving elites when no scouter can be proven to be listening. A legend about a Saiyan who transforms past the ordinary ceiling of the race, hair gone to light, power gone to something the Empire's own instruments supposedly cannot register. Vegeta hears it first from a warrior twice his age who tells it the way people tell ghost stories, half daring the room to believe it and half hoping no one does, because belief invites hope, and hope, in this court, is a liability with no upside. Vegeta says nothing when he hears it. He turns it over privately instead, for months, the way he turns over the scrap of alloy in his armor seam, and by 16 it has become the one arithmetic he permits himself, that isn't strictly defensive, a private ledger, opened only when he is alone, in which the sum at the bottom is always Frieza's name with a line drawn through it. He tells no one. Telling anyone would make it a plan, and a plan can be extracted. A private hope, kept wordless, cannot be tortured out of him because it does not yet exist in any language. Nappa, for his part, has aged around him the way a boulder ages around a sapling, slower, differently, still there. There is a night, after a mission that went wrong in the ordinary bloody ways missions go wrong, when Nappa sets a hand briefly on his shoulder, the old gesture from before either of them had learned to calculate the cost of gestures, and Vegeta shrugs it off with more force than the moment requires. He sees, for half a second, something pass over Nappa's face that might be hurt if Nappa were a man who still had the luxury of being hurt by him. He does not apologize. He has already worked out, at 16, that softness shown to a subordinate is softness reported to a superior eventually, in some form, by someone, and that the only truly safe tenderness is the tenderness no one witnessed happen at all, which functions in practice as no tenderness whatsoever. He trains past the point where training is useful in any immediate sense, past the point where Nappa, still nominally in command of his schedule, stops setting limits, because there is no longer a limit he can enforce. His body by 16 carries the accumulated evidence of it, scar tissue at the knuckles that never fully whitened back down, a permanent set to the shoulders that reads, to anyone who doesn't know better, as simple arrogance. He lets them read it that way. Arrogance is a story with an obvious ending, and no follow-up questions, and he has become expert, by now, at handing people the story that ends their curiosity fastest. He catches his reflection once in the dark glass of a viewport on the way back from that same mission, and does not recognize the shape of his own mouth. It has become an expression he has only ever seen on the officers he is supposed to fear. He understands, looking at it, exactly what he has been building for 8 years, and what it is for. Not menace for its own sake, but a face that makes the audits shorter, a face that makes Zarbon choose an easier target. Armor is armor whether it is forged or grown, and he has grown this one out of the same material Frieza's empire manufactures its threats from, because it was the only material available to a boy with no world left to arm him with anything else. Departure. The report on Raditz arrives without any weight attached to it, which is its own small mercy. Frieza's networks log the deaths of low elites the way they log fuel consumption, a line item, and Vegeta reads it in the same register he'd read anything else, and feels almost nothing shift, except that somewhere underneath the register, in the part of him he stopped visiting a long time ago, a door that had been shut for years opens half an inch on a word he has not let himself think about directly since he was small. Survivors. 3 of them, apparently, on a mudball at the edge of nowhere. One of them killed a low elite Saiyan with his bare power, untrained, uninstructed, born to a race he has no memory of belonging to. The planet itself has a name in the report that means nothing to him, and a designation he will not bother to learn correctly until he is already standing on it. What matters is smaller and more precise. An object exists there, native to the local population, that is said to grant any wish to whoever gathers its full set. Frieza's intelligence treats the rumor as a curiosity, filed alongside 100 other unverified local myths from 100 other unimportant worlds. Exactly the kind of thing an empire this vast can afford to overlook. Vegeta does not overlook it. He has spent a decade learning to recognize the one detail in a report that the rest of the room will walk past without noticing. And this is that detail, sitting quietly in the margin of an otherwise routine memo, worth more to him than the mineral rights, more than the low elite corps that occasioned the report in the first place. Vegeta does not feel kinship. He has trained the capacity for kinship out of himself with the same discipline he trained his stance, his silence, his face. What he feels instead, cleaner, more useful, entirely his own, is arithmetic. A world with an artifact capable of granting any wish. A Saiyan, wild and unshaped, sitting on top of that artifact without the faintest idea what he's sitting on. And above all of it, still, always, the long math he has been running quietly for a decade, and never once spoken aloud to Nappa, or to anyone. The math whose only visible symptom is a face that has learned to give nothing away. That Frieza's empire is not eternal. That immortal things still have joints, and that a prince with nothing left to lose is exactly the kind of weapon an empire forgets to disarm. He packs for the trip the way he packs for everything, which is to say there is almost nothing to pack. Armor. Scouter. A single change of undersuit. In the inner seam still, after 18 years, the scratched fragment of alloy with the crest worn nearly smooth from the number of times his thumb has passed over it without his permission, the one object in his possession that predates Frieza, predates the leash, predates the version of himself that learned to be useful in exchange for being allowed to keep existing. He does not look at it before the launch. He is aware of not looking at it, which is its own kind of looking. Nappa runs the pre-flight checks, without being asked twice, the two of them moving around the small ship in the practiced quiet of people who have shared a decade and a half of orders instead of conversation. Neither of them says anything about what the mudball actually represents, though both of them, in their own registers, know. For Nappa, another purge, another line in a ledger he stopped reading morally around the time Vegeta stopped needing him to. For Vegeta, something closer to a door. At one point Nappa asks, without any particular weight in it, whether he thinks the Wild One, Kakarot, the report calls him, a low elite infant's name nobody bothered updating, will be worth the trouble of retrieving alive. Vegeta considers the question longer than its size warrants. He does not say what he is actually turning over, which is not whether the fourth survivor is worth retrieving, but what it will mean to stand in front of someone who shares his blood and his dead world, and has apparently never once had to build the armor Vegeta has spent 18 years welding to himself plate by plate. He settles out loud for, "We'll see what he's made of." Nappa accepts this as an answer, because it is shaped like one, and does not ask what it costs to produce. He sets the coordinates himself. His hand does not shake, has not shaken in years, will not start now. Outside the viewport the dark scrolls past at a speed that makes it look almost gentle, almost patient, the way it always does right before a jump, and Vegeta looks at it the way he has learned to look at everything that might otherwise ask something of him, flatly, thoroughly, from a controlled distance, and thinks, without drama, because drama is a language he retired at 8 and never picked back up, that he is finally being sent somewhere with something at the end of it that isn't simply more of Frieza. He is carrying almost nothing. A scouter, a change of clothes, a scrap of dead metal worn smooth by a decade of not looking at it, no photograph of his father, no recording of his mother's voice if he ever had one, no relic of the throne room beyond the fragment, no letters, no friends waiting anywhere in the galaxy who would notice if the ship never arrived. In the manifest sense, in the sense any customs official would log. He is one of the lightest cargoes that has ever left a Frieza-class vessel. A boy could have crossed the same distance with the same hold, and it would have looked, to any outside eye, like an empty crossing. It is not an empty crossing, and he is carrying, at the same time, the entire unspoken weight of a species reduced to 3 known survivors and a 4th possibly dead on the world he is about to enter. 18 years of a face built stone by stone to survive audits designed to break it. A private, unkillable arithmetic aimed at the destruction of the single most powerful being in the universe. A pride so thoroughly forged into armor that he no longer remembers, some days, that it started as something softer, something a small boy felt on a planet that no longer has coordinates. He is carrying all of it the way he has learned to carry everything. Silently, at pressure, behind a face that gives away nothing, in a hold with almost nothing in it. The ship completes its calculations. The stars ahead thin and stretch. Vegeta does not look back at the seam in his armor, does not touch the fragment, does not allow himself the half-inch of door left open by the word survivors to swing any further than it already has. He sets course. That is all this is, to anyone watching. A prince, and a soldier, and a ship, going where they are told to go. It is not all it is.